It's all Greek to me, a beginner's guide to Greek genealogy. The Greek Americans are not an extremely large proportion of people here in the United States, but they're certainly not nothing, and they've made a tremendous contribution to this country of ours. Roughly somewhere between 1.2 and 3 million Americans claim some form of Greek ancestry, right? During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, roughly 450,000 Greeks arrived in the United States. Many others would go elsewhere in the Western world, including Australia and Canada, among others. To put this in proportion, between 1900 and 1915, roughly 1 in 4 Greek males aged 15 to 45 would immigrate at least temporarily to the United States. Later on in the 20th century, due to political instability, poverty, and other factors, another 211,000 Greeks would come to the United States between the years 1945 and 1982. The majority of Greek Americans would settle initially in the New York, New England area, with many going to the Midwest, creating sizable colonies, particularly in Chicago. Later on, as time progressed, like many of their compatriots, they would also flock to California and Florida. One key example would be Tarpon Springs, which is proportionally the most Greek city in America and actually has a very fascinating story of its founding and how it became the most Greek city in America, which was actually featured recently in our monthly newsletter, History Tidbits, for the Genealogy Gems Journal. So, like many Eastern and Southern Europeans in the late 19th century, the majority of first-generation immigrants will be male. Greece actually had one of the highest rates of return for all European immigrants at nearly 50%. Of those, over 90% of them would be young single males. Greece at this time is a very poor country. There's been a lot of political instability. Even worse for them, the economics are not going well. The country depended very heavily on currents to produce wine. And basically, the Russians and French decided to put in some tariffs and destroyed the Greek current industry, leading to widespread depression. As many people did at the time, they sought to come to the New World to work, to make money, and to make a better life for themselves. Most of the jobs will primarily be, heavy labor, industrial type jobs, but Greeks will find niches in diverse industries such as shoe shining, candy stores, restaurants, and even motion pictures. In particular, Greek immigrants will be associated with candy stores and restaurants. Even today, compared to just how small their numbers are, a very large proportion of Greek Americans will own and operate restaurants or indeed candy stores. In fact, one particular Greek immigrant family in Chicago invented the famous and delicious chocolate turtles. So where are they coming from? Well, so the first immigrants will actually start coming from the Peloponnese, right? So the Peloponnese is basically the very large peninsula that kind of looks like a three-fingered hand jutting into the Aegean Sea. And within the Peloponnese itself, they will primarily come from 2 areas called Laconia and Arcadia. Laconia is the furthest east, right before you hit the sea, and Arcadia is more like almost smack dab in the middle of the Peloponnese. Like many immigrant groups, this is largely because at first a few people from these areas will come over and they will establish chains of communication back to the old country, writing letters, smoothing out the passageway. We'll talk a little bit about like sort of a padrone system. But once one particular village, one particular area starts sending some of its, sons and to a much lesser degree daughters over, that acts as a magnet for others in the region. But that being said, eventually many more Greeks will immigrate as time goes on, particularly in the early 1900s. You'll see this from both northern Greece, the various Greek islands, and perhaps most interestingly, from a genealogy point of view anyway, many areas outside of Greece proper. So many Greeks will leave from two relatively big cities to come to the United States aboard steamships, because by the time that Greeks start immigrating, these steamship immigration lines have already been well established in England and Germany primarily, and they've started to expand their business into Southern Europe, either in like Naples, Palermo, um, Trieste, places like that. And sometimes you'll see Greeks leave through there. You'll see a lot leave through Naples, but many of them will leave through Patras, which is the largest city in the Peloponnese, and it's on the far western end, and Piraeus. Piraeus is actually the port of Athens. So those are the two big ports that people will leave through. But as time goes on, things become more specialized. You'll see them leave from other much smaller ports, primarily in the Peloponnese as well. So as I talked a little bit about it earlier, there is a padrone system, right? Like someone comes over, establishes themselves in a business, can speak workable English, and will often call back to the homeland, right? Writing letters, arranging for other people, whether they're family or friends or, what have you, and tell them about what's going on, that they can get them a job, all this sort of thing, right? So you'll start to see what we call chain migration. As more people come from these regions, they in turn invite other people. We talk a lot in genealogy about the importance of the fan system, right? Friends, associates, and neighbors. And this is a big reason why. It's a tough thing today to move to another state, right? Without knowing anybody. I can't imagine doing it in like 1907, not knowing the language, literally going across the ocean. It must have been absolutely terrifying. But with this kind of a system, though, you smooth out a lot of those issues, and there's some guarantees built in, that you'll have a job, you'll have a place to stay. Though I will say, of course, the system is open to abuse, and that is well noted. One thing that we can see from it, though, is it explains the concentration of people from a particular area in particular jobs, right? So, for example, like initially, some of the very first jobs that Greeks as a group tended to dominate were actually shoe shining. And of those shoe shiners, primarily in the late 19th century, well over half of them would be from the area around Sparta. And that's just simply because the first who ended up in the shoe shine industry happened to be from Sparta. And then, they had brought some people over who brought some more people over who brought some more people over. One of the most important things when doing this kind of research is trying to understand those links and associations, because they can help us not only fill in the gaps for making connections, but they can also supply answers of why people did what they did. That's all well and good. So that's basically, the history of like late 19th century immigration to the United States from Greece. So when we start doing Greek genealogy, it's a fairly standard thing, right? We start with ourselves and our immediate family. Whether you realize it or not, you are in possession of unique knowledge that nobody else has, right? Your parents, your grandparents, cousins, etc. Just writing this down, this is the kind of stuff that can often help you make those connections, go one step further back. I can't emphasize enough when doing this kind of research, trying to get back to the old country, that you start in the United States first. A lot of the problems that we see here at the center are people that want to jump straight to the old country and dive in, and you just can't do that any more than you start your genealogy with someone who was born in 1066 or something. It's putting the cart before the horse. So we want to start here with the American set of records, right? Census, vital records, such as, birth certificates, death certificates, etc., probate, tombstones, to go back that one step at a time, depending on how far back it's been since your ancestor came here. You want to get to that immigrant ancestor, and from there, you want to start collecting everything you possibly can. Naturalizations, alien files, passenger lists, so on and so forth. Those are particularly important. Naturalizations pre 1907 are not the best, but the vast majority of Greeks will actually immigrate after 1907. And many of them will make multiple trips back and forth between Greece and the United States. A lot of them will go back to Greece to get married and then bring the wife and eventually kids over, which gives you a lot of options to track them down in passenger lists. Naturalizations, because they are often post 1907, contain a lot of like hyper specific information, which is what you're going to need as you go further back in the old country. Another thing that's really important as well are church records. You see this a lot in doing, what I call quote unquote international genealogy, but ethnic based churches are some of the best places to go to try to get documents that can establish where your ancestors are from, which is almost always the key to going that one step further back. So if you can establish like what church the people in question attended, were married at, you can reach out to them and ask for some form of documentation of, the marriage certificate, just because there's a pretty good chance that they'll have more specific information, right? And of course, as I always say, it never hurts to give someone a phone call. When we are doing Greek genealogy, there are two things you absolutely have to have any real hope of success. You have to have the immigrant ancestor's original name and their exact home village. This is not something you can ballpark, and we're going to go into the reasons why. It really does have to be exact. But I will say, once you have that, a lot of things will start to open up. So let's take a look. Let's start with the immigrant's name. Many Greeks who became Americans, often decided to, change their name to something quote unquote more American, as many immigrants do and continue to do to this day. Sometimes you will see a Greek shorten their name, often chopping off the ulus or apolus. Papadopoulos or Papageorgiou becomes Papas. Leonidas can become Leo. If your surname is Papas, that is not the original Greek name. We don't know exactly what it was originally, but you can be rest assured that it was Americanized at some point. Another key point: Greeks do not use middle names. If you see an immigrant ancestor with a middle name, an abbreviation of a middle name, that is almost certainly his father's name. For women, if they have a middle name, it was also almost certainly their father's name, unless they are married. And if they are married, the middle name is almost certainly that of their husband. And now this other part is very, very, very important. From what I've seen, it's almost universal in, the late 19th, early 20th century. Greeks almost always name their firstborn son after the paternal grandfather. So if a man named Stavros has a kid named Demetrios, Demetrios's firstborn son will almost certainly be named Stavros as well. It's not 100%, but it's pretty darn close. All right. And finally, this is just good advice for genealogy in general, but do not get hung up on the spelling. People butcher names. The Greek alphabet is different than, the Latin-based alphabet that we use here in the United States, right? So, for example, the Greek alphabet does not have anything like a C. They only have like a hard K sound. That's something I've seen a lot for name changes is people are having a hard time finding their immigrant ancestor because the name starts with a K, but for whatever reason, the immigration authority, the town clerk, or whoever was recording it records it as a C, and it just completely throws everything off. here's a naturalization, and we can see up at the top here, Nick Gianos. He's just shortened his name, right? Like he's gone from Nicholas to Nick, which is pretty normal. But then we look at the family name, right? Giannopoulos. This is pretty common. It's not something dramatic. It's just making it a bit easier for him being here in a new country, right? But it's a good thing to keep in mind. Here's another one, another Nicholas, Nicholas Karos, right? But once again, look at that original surname, Karagiannakis. You're not going to necessarily assume Karos equals Karagiannakis and say the same way that like Johann becomes John or something. So this is one of the reasons why we have to have the original name. We have to, because if we don't, like it just gets pretty tricky pretty quick. But also bear in mind, it's not always this simple. Sometimes it'll be something like this. And I'll be honest, this is one of my favorite naturalizations I've ever seen. Thomas Andrews, formerly known as Dionysius Dionysiopoulos. I like to think that there's a family out there of Andrews right now that are really proud of their Scottish heritage, right? Never knowing that they're truly Greek. But so you'll see this from time to time. So this is another big reason why we do it a step at a time and try to collect as much paperwork as we possibly can. All right. So the other side that we talked about, besides having the original name, we have to have the right village. Greece is, of course, a very old civilization. The Greek sense of Greekness has been around for millennia, right? As such, cities, towns, villages, they've often gone under many different names. Even within the past 100, 150, 200 years, the name of the particular village that your ancestor came from may not be what it is called today. Things change. This is especially true of the broader administrative districts, which aren't as interesting, but are very important from a genealogical point of view because it may determine where you need to go to get records, right? This is another thing, too. Many names are shared across multiple villages. It's kind of like Springfield in the United States. Like how many Springfields are in the US? Like dozens. The same holds true for many places in Greece, right? I can't tell you how many villages are named after saints, and there's like 20 of them. So you have to find the exact village. It's another reason why I'm always telling people when it comes to this sort of thing, you have to collect everything. You've got to get it all because even though you might think that you already have enough paperwork, a naturalization started in Massachusetts but is finished in New York, they might contain just slightly different information that may be the key to unlocking where you need to go next. So this is a good example of it. This is a registration card for a man named Miltiades Providakis. So let's take a look at his place of birth, Vatalaros, Greece. Well, so there's a couple things that I had to explore and try to figure out. So first thing, there is no such place as Vatalaros. It's actually Vadalakos. But there are many Vadalakoses, as it turns out. So this isn't particularly helpful, right? But I went to his naturalization, and when I looked down at my last place of foreign residence at the bottom there, it's Vadalakos, Crete, the big island at the southern end of Greece before you get to Egypt. So now I can go back. Now I know where to look for records, right? I'm not looking for a Vadalakos, in northern Greece or the Peloponnese. I'm looking at the one in Crete. If there's one thing I would like everyone to try to take away from this presentation, it's that I need the original name and I need the correct village. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. This is the EETAA website. So basically, it's one of the most important ways that we can track the changes a village has gone through over the course of the centuries, because this is a government run website and it documents all the changes for a particular village, right? So you should be, and this is accessible here in the United States. It can be a little tricky to work, but once you get comfortable with it, it's not so bad. I used an example, this particular town, Leopesi. If you notice, it seems to start life in 1835 as part of the prefecture of Attica and Boeotia. And then it just goes back to Attica in 1899. Then in 1909, it's back to Attica and Boeotia. And then in 1915, it changes its name to Paeania, which is what it remains to this day, as of 1991 anyway. So you can see here, depending on when your immigrant ancestor came over, whenever they got, if they got naturalized, you could be looking at a completely different name for a particular village, let alone an administrative district. So it's always important to double check these kinds of things and just make sure that once again, you are documenting the correct village, right? And so it can take some time. This probably doesn't surprise my coworkers, but genealogy often demands an understanding of history. And I would say this is nowhere more important than doing Greek genealogy. You will have a very hard time with the records and locations if you don't understand what Greece was, like the modern day nation state, how it expanded into its current form, as well as different things that happened along the way that can often explain what may be confusing mixed signals depending on the documentation. What you see here is where Greece has been in terms of like as a modern day nation state into the 20th century. Although I should note that the yellow parts were occupied very shortly during the aftermath of World War One, before the Great Disaster that saw basically most of the ethnic Greeks removed from Asia Minor. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. In the immortal words of Plato, the Greeks have been settled around the Mediterranean and Black Seas like frogs around a pond for millennia. So you can often find Greek communities in places like Alexandria and Egypt, many of whom will come to the United States. And that will, of course, will often demand a completely different approach when going about trying to do it through genealogy. So here's a good example of that. The important thing is what I've circled here. So you can see off to the left here, there are a number of Greeks, right? Like, I mean, Politis, Gonidakis, etc., etc., etc. When we look off to the right there, it lists their country as Italy. Well, how did that happen? Well, if we look for just one bit over, we'll see Rhodes, Kos, etc. Now, what these are is these are the Dodecants Islands. So these particular islands, they're just off the coast of Turkey at kind of like the southeast end. In the early 20th century, they were owned by the Ottoman Turks, but then Italy took them over after a short-lived war with Turkey, and they actually occupied them until 1946, at which point the Italians got out and they were able to join the Greek state. So that's why you see the country is listed as Italy, because Italy controlled it. But you can tell just from the names and everything else that these are ethnic Greeks. But that's just something to keep in mind as we go along. Finding the village, this administrative divisions are a big part of it, because once again, it's all about trying to track down these records. So as of 2019, Greece is divided into decentralized administrations, then regions, and then municipalities. Municipalities are really what we will mainly be interested in, but it's important to have a general overview. So to give you an example, Sparta is a municipality in the region of Laconia, which is in the decentralized administration of Peloponnese, Western Greece, and the Ionian. And yes, that's its official name. It's important to remember that when people say a particular town like Sparta, they could very well mean it in the same way that people that live in a suburb of Indianapolis today say that they're from Indianapolis when they can be, 30 miles away from downtown Indianapolis. They probably don't even live in Marion County. It's just easier, right? I lived in St. Louis for many years. I lived out in St. Charles, but when people asked me where I lived, when I went to school in Indiana, it was just easier to say St. Louis. And so you'll sometimes see that with our immigrant ancestors. In Greece, there are specific records that can help you when trying to establish your ancestors and connections therein. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them. One of the first is the Matroon Aranun, which are male registers. Basically, ever since Greek independence, which is roughly the 1820s, every village is required to maintain a list of male births, the year and place of birth, father's name, and father's occupation. Females are not listed, hence why they're called male registers. And I should note that, like many records, no matter where you go, it takes a while for them to become relatively consistent and relatively comprehensive. So lots of people will be left out. There may be villages that just didn't do it that year. It's tough to say. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. There's also a town register or Demetologion. Basically, what these are is a municipal record, typically containing information about the residents of a specific village or municipality. They're almost like family lists. They're compiled roughly in the mid 1900s. They tend to list families in alphabetical order by surname, often have details like names, parents' names, birth dates, residence, and occupation, and can be a really good source if you're able to confirm a link between one of your ancestors and someone listed in this municipal register, because it will fill a lot of things out. You'll also see voter lists. These are both civil and parish. So voter lists start obviously after the Greek Revolution. People are allowed to vote. So from 1829 to 1864, men over the age of 25 could vote. Though in 1864, this was lowered to 21. They will often, include the voter's name, father's name, age, place, occupation, and occasionally the resident. That being said, once again, they're a bit all over the place, shall we say. A lot of these records are kept at an extremely local level. And so preservation and maintenance has often not been the greatest. On the other hand, though, it also opens up the possibility that somebody cleaning some warehouse out somewhere will stumble across a bunch of new ones. So there's always that. Where do I start looking in the old country? All right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, record keeping by the Greek state starts in the 1840s when it becomes independent from the Ottoman Turks. But it takes a while for things to work basically the way we would like them to work. There are 3 different locations you need to familiarize yourself when dealing with Greek records. They're kept at town halls, state archives, and churches. And because Greece has a national church, unlike the United States, a lot of these records are kept in, there's not a hard and fast line like there is here in the United States. So there can be duplicates at different places. It can often feel like there's not a lot of rhyme and reason. Currently, digitization and access are issues. There remains a lot to be done in terms of digitizing records. That being said, I will say the Greek government has proposed putting quite a bit of money into digitizing a lot of the Greek archives. So I think that is something to keep an eye out. In the United States, the 2 best genealogy databases to use for tracing your Greek ancestry are MyHeritage, which has quite a bit of like voter lists, male registers, although they're pretty much exclusively from the area around Sparta, which we're going to take a look at when I do some examples later on, and Greek Ancestry, which is a paid website. but has digitized a wide variety of different Greek records. They're definitely worth checking into. And finally, the GAC, which is basically the Greek National Archives website. Frankly, it kind of runs like it's something from the late 90s. I haven't talked about it a lot because there's not a ton on there genealogy wise yet, but I would definitely encourage you to check it out and try to navigate it, especially once you've established particular village and area your family comes from. Once again, can't emphasize this enough. Many of these records are created and kept at a very local level. Consistency is just not going to happen. And I promise you, you'll be a much happier researcher if you can accept this now. Speaking of the GAC, the General State Archives, they do have a wide variety of records. It can range from everything records to school records, but it is intensely fragmentary, seems to be a bit all over the place, but it is a free website. So I would highly encourage you to take a look at it. The state archives basically has a branch at every major municipal area. The local branch should always be your first stop or your first contact, because unlike the other two places we're going to talk about, these people are paid to help people with, obtaining documentation. Town halls and churches, it is a decidedly, and not even secondary concern, right? So you're going to have a much better experience, I would generally speaking say at the GAC than you will at other places. And also remember, there's a lot of overlap between these three places. So you will often find church records at the GAC. Town halls, once again, primarily concerned with local government, there are still valuable records kept in the local town halls and or mayor's office. This is usually the place you need to go whenever you're researching family members that are closer to us in time, which for Greek records is usually post 1925. Post 1925 material will usually not be at the archives, but will usually be at the town hall. Although, once again, remember, standardization is not a thing. The Greek National Church, very important, particularly for females. I think you've noticed from our voter lists and our male registers that, the women are left out. Therefore, church records are some of the most important for establishing and connecting female members of our families. Prior to 1925, all vital records were created by the Greek Orthodox Church. Because once again, it's a national church. It's all twisted together. No non-religious marriage, right? So you didn't go down to City Hall to get married until 1982, well within living memory. So keep an eye on there, and we'll talk a little bit about how to contact them at the end. How do I get these records? Well, access can be difficult from overseas. It can be very difficult. One of the most important things you need to do is try to determine where a record should theoretically be kept and write an email. Remember, be nice when writing an email. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? Also, ask for help. One of the best places for Greek genealogy right now is on Facebook groups, right? Like Hellenic Genealogy. People post on there all the time for help. It's a very friendly community. And of course, you can always shoot me an email too. Don't be afraid to reach out. We're going to take a look at some examples here. Now, unfortunately, I am not Greek. I know it is a grave moral flaw, but still I continue. So let's take a look at one particular family that I kind of picked out. We'll talk about why I picked them later on. But I think this particular family offers a really great example of some of the things we've talked about for doing Greek genealogy, as well as being from an area where I could access records relatively straightforward. So this is a North Carolina death certificate for one Nicholas A. Stevens, or Nicholas A. Stavronakos, right? So, obviously this is pretty useful. It gives me his wife and his parents' names, which is important. But one thing I want you to notice, Nicholas A. Stavronakos. So remember, Greeks don't have middle names. That A is A for his father, which I know Anthony Stavronakos or Anthony Stevens. That all makes sense. So, okay, so Anthony Stevens, Anthony Stavronakos makes sense. And I can use all this because I have a rough, I have a date of birth, all these sorts of things can kind of help me go one step further back. This is from the 1950 census when Nicholas was still with us. I know it's him. Here's his wife, Fatina, their 3 kids, all that good stuff. And so I'm using this to go further back. Here's some further information that was used. So once again, Nicholas Anthony Stavronakos, his father, Anthony or Antonio, as we'll see. So one thing that's really important to see here, place of birth, Sparta. Okay. All right. So I'm getting there. I know Stavronakos is his original surname, right? Because he changes it at some point to Stevens. And I have a rough place of birth. Or do I? Because as we talked about earlier, people might say Sparta the same way that people in the suburbs might say they're from Indianapolis. So it's always important to verify all of this before we try hunting in the old country. This right here is one of his 2 naturalizations. This provides me with further information, just kind of filling things out, like when he arrived, all that sort of stuff in 1911. I was born in Sparta, Greece, October 1899. When he got married, working as a confectioner. Once again, lots of Greeks, running candy shops, things like that. Okay, that's good. Here's a registration card. Now, see, I'm learning some more information too, right? Because his dad is not Anthony, it's Antonio Stavronakos, working at a soda fountain basically in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Once again, we're collecting everything. We're collecting as much as we can. All of this is going to add up. This in turn led me to find their passenger lists. Like many Greek men of the time, they will go back and forth at least twice because, once again, the goal for so many of these people is not necessarily to start a new life in America. It's to make a bunch of money and then go back to Greece, where you can use that money to, pay for your sister's dowry, purchase a business, things along those lines. It's a good thing from a genealogy point of view if they do make multiple crossings because it increases the likelihood of obtaining further information. So this is from roughly 1911. And take a look. So both of them are right here, Antonius and Nicholas Stavronakos. But when I look the city or town last permanent residence, it doesn't say Sparta. It says Susitanis. Well, that's kind of throwing a monkey wrench into the works because I thought it was supposed to be Sparta, right? This in turn led me to finding other documents because once again, the names kind of morph. Now it's not Antonio Stevens, it's Anthony Stevens. His wife, who had previously gone by the name Eugenia, had become Jenny. This in turn led me to find Nicholas's father, Antonius. It led me to find his declaration of intention to become naturalized. And right there in the middle, I found exactly what I needed to find. I was born in Susitanius, Sparta, Greece. All right. So now I realize that he's using Sparta in a much bigger way. Susitani is what I need to find. So I quickly went to the EETAA website where I found Susitani pretty quickly, and I knew it was a Susitani next to Sparta. It's only a couple miles from it. It's a village of less than 200 people to this day, about 150 years ago. This is my village. So Susitani is where I need to start looking. So then I went on MyHeritage and I was able to quickly find Nicholas, who married a Fotini, which we know from his death certificate, the census records, and so on and so forth. I was able to find his marriage to her in Sparta that lists both of their fathers. So now I'm looking at my very first Greek record, it all starts to make sense. He went to the United States. They worked as confectioners and soda fountain people, right? They come home, he gets married before he goes back. One thing I would like to encourage you to do is, obviously, one other thing about all these Greek records, they're going to be in Greek. And while I did take ancient Greek in college, that has not prepared me for cursive modern Greek. So I can feel my way, but I would encourage everyone to take a picture whenever you find the name of your ancestor printed or signed in Greek, because it will absolutely help you as you go further along. I've gotten pretty good, for example, at recognizing Stavronakos. And I very quickly, once again, on my heritage, I was able to find Antonius's marriage to Eugenia, or should I say Jenny, as she became known here in the United States, and their marriage in September of 1896. And that also lets me know that Antonius's father was an in Stavronakos. Some of the other records that were available on my heritage included this 1873 electoral roll, which had a Nicholas Stavronakos in this election voter list from Susitani, a village of less than 200 people. I know that Antonio's father was a Nicholas, both because you have the in Stavronakos in the marriage license, but also, from what we can tell, the Nicholas that we've been tracing, the one who becomes Nick Stevens, is the firstborn son. So he would almost certainly be Nicholas. Now, I would need Antonius's death certificate to confirm this, which I could get through Rhode Island. And he passed away a year or two after the particular records are available online for me to get, but I know where to get them. And I'm pretty sure that this would confirm me and what I'm thinking. I should also note that this 1873 electoral roll notes Nicholas's father, Stavros Stavronakos. Then I took a look at Greek Ancestry, which once again is a paid website, but I just looked for Stavronakos in Susitani. And so I'm very interested in this 1844 voter list, which I may purchase at some point, of Stavros Stavronakos. I would need Antonius's death certificate to confirm this. But once again, given the very tiny nature of the village, there's almost certainly some connection somewhere. So I think you can kind of see from these various records how we were able to go one step further back. I should note, obviously, that when we get to Stavros, it's not definitive. I need to have a couple more critical pieces of information. But I think you can see that these are all things that need to be checked out. So, like I said, I'm not Greek, but as it turns out, I didn't discover this until not too long ago, but it turns out the Stavronakos clan actually runs a kind of a hot dog restaurant actually in the Olneyville section of Providence, Rhode Island, which was very interesting because their social media account provided context for like why the family moved from place to place and things like that. Really helped kind of expand it further. So we still have work to do, but I would point out that there's a pretty good chance we've now gotten almost to the very beginning of Greek state records, which is pretty good. What do we do when we get stuck? Once again, the fan method. Friends, associates, and neighbors. These connections will often give you a hint of where to go. Finally, ask for help. Facebook groups, genealogy societies, and libraries are all willing to help. Just have to say the word. In 323 BC, the Greek king Alexander the Great was forced to turn back from further conquests in India because his soldiers refused to go a single step further. Turning back, Alexander wept, for he had no more worlds to conquer. Fortunately, in the world of Greek genealogy, this is not true. Our focus today has been focusing on finding the original surname and the proper village. There are many additional records, city directories, dowry records, which are fascinating and were required by Greek law until 1982, so on and so forth. So there is still a lot out there to to be studied when trying to get just that one further step back in your family story. Finally, I would like to thank the kind people at Spartan Roots, Hellenic Genealogy Greek, and Greek Ancestry for all of their help in terms of putting things out there. This program would not have been possible without all of their hard work. So I just wanted to say thank you. All right, so I believe now we can turn it over to questions.
All right, thank you. So,
Mhm.
our first question is somebody's wondering where to find information on Greek citizens who lived in Smyrna, Turkey, and the island of Chios while under the Ottoman Empire, early
Okay.
1900s.
A lot of people think all the records were destroyed in the Great Disaster when the Greeks in Smyrna and other places were kicked out basically, but that wasn't the case. Um, there are some records remaining in Turkish repositories, but frankly, those are very, very difficult to get a hold of. You'd have to almost do a program on Turkish genealogy. That being said, the best thing you can do is identify the particular village that your family came from in that area, because what happened initially in 1923 is that with the forced expulsion of populations, like the Greeks in Asia have to go to Greece, the Muslims in Greece have to go to Turkey, except with a few special exceptions. Many of the people that were expelled from Asia Minor were settled in places like Aegean Macedonia and were settled in new villages, right? And many of the priests that came with them, they were able to take a lot of the church books with them, right, with their marriages, baptisms, and deaths. So the best thing I would recommend doing is take a look at what happened to the particular village and if they were settled in a new village in Greece. A lot of those also ended up at the National Archives. And I should note that it's a big project. You'll see it on both Greek Ancestry and others, where they are trying to digitize the incredible amount of uh, documentation that people had, like claims wise, against the government after their expulsion. And so that can give you a lot of clues of where to go further as well. So keep an eye on the GAK website and Greek Ancestry for those.
So, our next question is where would be a place to start for someone that went through Canada from Greece into the US?
Well, you start with, where they ended up, right? Depending on the time period, if they came over in the late 19th century, there should be some border crossings as well as a passenger list. Um, but the best thing to do is always work your way backwards. Take a look at, naturalizations. Um, find out what, if they were able to live in a Greek community, if there was a church in that area that might have records as well. But always start as close as you can to where the person was here in the United States or Canada, and then just work your way back a step at a time and see what happens.
Thank you. Our next question is can emails or letters be written in English to request information, or is it best to write those in Greek?
They need to be in Greek. Um, One thing I always say when writing emails to foreign countries is you want the bar for them to help you out to be as low as possible, right? Because there's an excellent chance that, if you write them in English and they don't, um, and they may speak English, they may be able to read English. You don't know for sure, obviously, but it increases the likelihood that that just goes right in the trash. I will say there are form letters attached to your handout. And those, you can just put those into Google Translate and translate them into modern Greek and then just copy and paste them, right? Just be sure to avoid any kind of you know, sayings or something like that that won't really translate well. But, just stick with like very basic hello, my name is, this is what I'm seeking. Always remember to look ask for a specific record. Please do not send them something like, I'm looking for everything on this family, because it will go right in the trash.
Thank you. Do you have any tips or tricks for searching Greek records in MyHeritage to make the most out of your searches?
Yes. My heritage is not always the easiest interface. Uh, my biggest recommendation is whenever you're starting out, go to the Greek page and search in the Greek records itself as opposed to the more general search. Try to spell the name in both English and Greek. I was able to track down a number of Stavronakos by utilizing both sets. I will also say too, be sure to write down the exact way that MyHeritage spells it, right? Because you get a letter wrong and it just doesn't seem to be as responsive as other databases might be. So that would be my best advice.
Thank you. So we have one more question, and before we get to that, I'll just mention if anyone has any
Mhm.
questions that pop up, you can send us an email at genealogy@acpl.info. And if you
Mhm.
would like a copy of the chat, please send us an email there as well, and we'll get that to you. And so our last question is, are church records open for viewing?
Generally speaking, no. It very much depends on the individual um, parish. It depends on the parish priest. But my understanding is that it's not something that you can usually just like make an appointment to come see them. It has to be a relationship, you know, where uh, you reach out, you explain what you're looking for. If you're doing this in Greece, probably doesn't hurt to, remind yourself that, running a parish is expensive and they might appreciate some, American currency. Uh, but understand that, their goal for all of this is not to maintain genealogy records for us, the genealogists, right? It is a religious duty, and they take that very seriously. Um, so I would simply say, you know, reach out, uh, by letter. Sometimes that, indicates like a willingness to work harder. It's also a physical object. I'm a big believer that physical objects are things that you can't just remove, while emails, they just have a habit of disappearing from time to time. If you're at all possible, have a local person, that perhaps reach out for you. If it's a church here in America, if you know someone that attends the church, that's not a bad way to go either, right? um, I usually just try to say, like, do your best to like make it on a human level, and it makes it much harder for them to say no.
Good deal. Thank you. And again, for anybody who has any additional questions, please send us an email. Genealogy@acpl.info is our email address. And so thank you, Logan, for presenting, and thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you have a good day.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.